The Butterfly and the Dandelion's Promise. Once upon a time, in a vast meadow bathed in golden sunlight, a single dandelion stood tall amidst the swaying grass. Her feathery white seeds danced in the wind, shimmering in the afternoon glow. Though she stood among thousands of other wildflowers, she often felt lonely, yearning for a connection that would make her heart bloom. One breezy afternoon, a delicate butterfly, adorned with iridescent blue and gold wings, fluttered down and landed upon her petals. He had been flying across the meadow, searching for a place to rest when he noticed the lonely dandelion swaying gently in the wind. "Hello there," the butterfly greeted with a warm smile. "You seem to be lost in thought." The dandelion sighed. "I watch the wind carry away my seeds, and I wonder where they go. Will they ever find a place to grow? Will they remember me?" The butterfly tilted his head. "Every journey is an adventure. They will travel far and wide, but they will always carry a part of you with them." The dandelion felt comforted by his words. "But will I ever see them again? Or will I stand here alone forever?" The butterfly pondered for a moment before making a promise. "Whenever the wind blows, I will return to you and tell you about the places I've seen, the flowers I've met, and the beauty of the world beyond this meadow. And if I ever find one of your seeds growing elsewhere, I will carry your love to it." Touched by his kindness, the dandelion smiled. "Then, I will wait for your return. No matter how far you go, the meadow will always be here for you." And so, with each passing season, the butterfly kept his promise. He traveled far, soaring over lush green forests, across sparkling rivers, and into flower-filled valleys. With each return, he whispered stories of his adventures to the dandelion, who listened in awe. One spring, after a long and weary journey, the butterfly returned with news that filled the dandelion's heart with warmth. "I found your children," he said. "They have taken root in a meadow beyond the hills, standing tall and strong just like you." Tears of joy welled in the dandelion's eyes. "Then, I am not alone." The butterfly nodded. "Love never fades. It travels, grows, and finds new places to bloom." For years, their friendship flourished. But time, as gentle and relentless as the wind, brought change. The butterfly's wings grew weaker with each journey, and the dandelion knew their time together was growing short. On one final evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the butterfly rested upon the dandelion one last time. "My journey is ending," he whispered softly. "But I have one last promise to keep." The dandelion trembled. "What is it?" The butterfly smiled, though his wings were heavy. "When my time comes, let the wind carry me away, just as it carries your seeds. And if we are lucky, perhaps we will meet again in another meadow, in another life." The dandelion's petals quivered as the breeze picked up. She watched as the butterfly took his final flight, carried gently by the wind into the vast, endless sky. Though she never saw him again, she felt his presence in the rustling wind, in the gentle touch of the breeze against her petals. And as the seasons changed, new butterflies came, carrying whispers of stories from distant lands, just as he had promised. But the dandelion's own story did not end. Over time, more seeds were carried away, landing in gardens, fields, and hidden meadows. Some grew beside bubbling brooks, others near towering oak trees, and a few even took root in rocky soil, defying all odds. Each new dandelion carried a part of her spirit, just as the butterfly had said. The meadow itself changed over the centuries, as nature's grand cycle of renewal played out again and again. The once familiar landscape had transformed, tall trees now stood where the grass had once danced freely in the wind, and the sounds of birds echoed in new and unfamiliar melodies. One spring, an old butterfly, his wings worn and faded, yet still glimmering with hints of gold and blue, returned to the meadow. He had traveled across endless lands, yet something deep inside him had drawn him back to this place. As he landed upon a dandelion swaying in the soft breeze, an overwhelming sense of nostalgia washed over him. "Hello there," he whispered, his voice weary yet warm. The dandelion trembled. "I have been waiting for you." A gust of wind carried tiny seeds into the sky, and in that moment, the butterfly understood. He had returned home. He could not recall why or how, but he knew that this meadow, this dandelion, had always been a part of him. For days, they spoke of their journeys. The butterfly recounted the distant lands he had seen, the towering mountains, the deep valleys, the endless oceans. The dandelion shared her wisdom, the stories she had gathered from the whispers of the wind. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon one final time, the butterfly rested his wings. He had flown for a lifetime, and now, he was tired. The dandelion knew that soon, the wind would carry him away. But she did not cry, for she understood. This was not an ending. It was another beginning. As the first light of dawn kissed the meadow, the wind picked up once more, carrying both seeds and whispers into the sky. And somewhere, far away, in a place unseen, a new butterfly emerged from its cocoon, its wings glistening in hues of gold and blue. And so, the story continued. Love, like the wind, never faded, it only found new places to grow. The Mirror's Enchanted Adventure. In a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and vast forests, there stood an old bookstore that few ever noticed. It was the kind of place that seemed frozen in time, with dust-covered shelves lined with ancient tomes and forgotten stories. At the back of the store, behind stacks of neglected books, stood a grand, ornate mirror. Its frame was golden, entwined with intricate carvings of twisting vines and mysterious symbols. It was no ordinary mirror, but few had ever dared to look into its depths long enough to realize its secret. One stormy evening, a girl named Ilara wandered into the bookstore, seeking shelter from the rain. She had always loved books, but there was something about this place that felt different, almost alive. The air smelled of parchment and magic, and as she browsed, her fingers instinctively trailed along the spines of books older than her great-grandparents. Then, she saw it, the mirror. Its surface shimmered strangely, reflecting not just the bookstore but something beyond. When she stepped closer, a voice, soft as a whisper yet as commanding as a storm, echoed in her mind. Ilara, step forward. Your adventure awaits. Her heart pounded, but curiosity overwhelmed fear. She reached out, and the moment her fingertips brushed the glass, the world around her twisted. The bookstore dissolved into a swirl of silver mist, and before she could gasp, she was pulled through the mirror into another world. Ilara landed softly on the ground, the scent of fresh flowers and damp earth filling her senses. She stood in an enchanted forest, where trees glowed faintly in hues of purple and blue, their leaves shimmering like stars. The sky above was a swirl of deep twilight, as if caught forever between day and night. Where am I? She whispered to herself. Before she could take a step, the ground beneath her shimmered, and from the mist emerged a fox, except it was no ordinary fox. Its fur was a deep silver, and its eyes glowed with ancient wisdom. You've crossed into the realm of echoes, the fox said, its voice smooth yet edged with urgency. The mirror has chosen you, Ilara. But time is short. You must find the keeper before the shadows do. The keeper? Shadows? Ilara's mind raced with questions, but the fox was already moving, its silver tail flicking for her to follow. She had no choice but to keep up. They traveled through glowing forests and across floating bridges made of moonlight, passing rivers that sang in hushed voices. Ilara learned that the keeper was the guardian of the mirror's magic, the only one who could send her home. But darkness had crept into this world, shadows, faceless beings that devoured light and stole memories, were hunting the keeper. Ilara soon discovered that the shadows were not just hunting the keeper. They were after her too. Their journey took them to the Tower of Glass, an enormous structure made of mirrors, each reflecting not just reality but hidden truths. Inside, the keeper, a tall figure cloaked in flowing blue robes, awaited her. His face remained veiled, but his voice was calm and knowing. Ilara, you are the mirror's chosen traveler. To return home, you must face the shadows. You must find what was lost. The air grew cold, and the ground trembled. The shadows had arrived. The battle was unlike anything Ilara had imagined. The shadows moved like ink, slipping between reflections, their presence distorting the mirrors. But Ilara wasn't powerless, something inside her awakened. she realized that the mirror was not just a doorway but a weapon. By calling upon its magic, she wielded light against the darkness. As she fought, flashes of memories filled her mind, memories she had never known. A lost past. A forgotten promise. A world she had once belonged to. The final shadow lunged at her, but Ilara raised her hand. The mirror's power surged through her, and in a brilliant burst, the shadows vanished, swallowed by their own darkness. The Keeper approached her, his face finely visible, an older version of herself. "Ilara," he said gently, "this is not your first time here. You have walked through the mirror before, in another life. The question is, do you wish to leave, or do you wish to remember?" Ilara hesitated, her heart torn between two worlds. But deep down, she already knew the answer. Taking a deep breath, she stepped toward the mirror one last time, knowing that whichever path she chose, her adventure was far from over. And with that, the glass shimmered, and the world twisted once more. But this time, she was ready. Yet, something was different. The world she returned to was not quite the same bookstore she had left behind. The books were different, the air heavier, the whispers louder. The Keeper's words echoed in her mind, this was not her first journey. As she stepped forward, a new adventure unfolded before her. The mirror had not just shown her another world, it had shown her the many layers of reality itself. And she, Ilara, was no ordinary traveler. Somewhere, in the deepest recesses of the mirror's magic, lay secrets yet to be unveiled. A past not yet fully remembered. A future waiting to be rewritten. And so, her journey continued. Days turned into weeks, and Ilara found herself venturing deeper into the unknown. She met others who had crossed through the mirror before, each carrying their own secrets, their own pieces of the puzzle. Some had been lost for centuries, trapped in the mirror's shifting landscapes, searching for answers they could no longer remember. With each passing moment, Ilara uncovered more of the truth. The mirror was more than a gateway, it was a prison, a protector, and a puzzle all at once. And she was at the center of its mysteries. But the question remained, would she ever truly escape, or was she destined to walk the endless reflections of time? Only the mirror knew for sure. The Dream Collector. In a city where the night sky always shimmered with unseen constellations, nestled between the realms of waking and sleep, there existed a hidden shop known only to those who wandered too far into their dreams. The shop had no set location, appearing in different alleyways, rooftops, or even reflected in the depths of moonlit lakes. Its wooden door bore no sign, only a single golden eye carved into the frame, watching silently. Those who entered did not stumble upon it by chance, they were chosen. One such visitor was a boy named Lucien, a dreamer lost in the ever-expanding maze of his own mind. Unlike most, who barely remembered their dreams, Lucien recalled every detail of his nightly journeys. They were vivid, filled with colors beyond earthly understanding, sounds that resonated in his chest long after waking. And yet, he had never questioned why he alone held onto them so dearly, until the night he found the Dream Collector's shop. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world shifted. The air inside the shop was thick with the scent of old parchment and something sweeter, almost like stardust. Shelves lined the walls, stretching impossibly high, filled with glass jars of every shape and size. Each jar contained a swirling mist, shifting hues depending on the angle one looked. Some glowed softly, while others pulsed with restless energy. Behind the counter stood a woman unlike any Lucien had ever seen. Her eyes held galaxies, her long silver hair floated as if caught in an invisible current. She was draped in robes woven from the night sky itself. "Welcome, dream traveler," she said, her voice a melody in the air. "You have found your way to the Archive of Dreams." Lucien stepped forward hesitantly. "The Archive of Dreams," he echoed. The woman nodded, plucking a small vial from the shelf and rolling it between her fingers. Inside, a tiny storm raged, flashes of lightning illuminating a city of floating islands. Every dream ever dreamed is collected here. Some are left behind, forgotten by their owners. Some are stolen. And some are dangerous. A shiver ran down Lucien's spine. He had never imagined dreams could be more than fleeting illusions of sleep. "Why am I here?" he asked. The woman studied him for a moment before reaching beneath the counter, retrieving a small, dust-covered jar. Inside, a golden mist curled and flickered like a captured firefly. "This is yours," she said. "A dream you lost long ago." Lucien hesitated before taking the jar. The moment his fingers brushed the glass, a flood of memories surged through him. A dream of a door hidden in a field of endless stars. A voice calling his name. A promise he had forgotten. "There is more to you than you know, Lucien," the dream collector murmured. "And more to this world than meets the waking eye." Lucien returned night after night, each visit revealing more secrets of the archive. He learned that not all dreams were kind. Some held the weight of nightmares so potent they threatened to consume those who dreamt them. Others belonged to people who no longer existed, their memories preserved in the jars like whispers of the past. But the most curious discovery of all was the locked room at the back of the shop. Its door was carved with ancient symbols, humming softly whenever Lucien passed too close. "What's in there?" he finally dared to ask. The dream collector's expression darkened. Dreams that should never have been. Lucien felt an irresistible pull toward the door. He had always been drawn to the forbidden, to the mysteries lurking in the corners of existence. One night, when the collector was away, he gave in to temptation. The lock crumbled at his touch. Inside, he found shelves upon shelves of blackened jars. The mist inside them did not glow, it writhed, tendrils pressing against the glass like caged creatures. The air crackled with the weight of something immense, something hungry. And then, one of the jars cracked. The darkness seeped out, moving like liquid shadow, curling around Lucien's feet. A whisper coiled through his mind, ancient and knowing. "You should not have come." The world spun. Lucien fell, plunging into a void where time and space unraveled. He saw glimpses of lives that were not his own, dreams of kings long forgotten, nightmares that had shaped history. And at the center of it all, a presence stirred, something that had been waiting for centuries to be set free. It reached for him. But then, a burst of golden light erupted, shattering the darkness. Lucien gasped as hands pulled him back into reality. The dream collector stood over him, her robes billowing like a storm. The door to the forbidden room slammed shut behind them. "You were warned," she said, her voice heavy with something between disappointment and relief. Lucien trembled. "What was that?" She sighed, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "The thing that dreams of ending all dreams. You are lucky to be alive." He swallowed hard. "I don't understand." The dream collector studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "Not yet. But you will." And with that, she handed him a new jar. This one was empty, waiting. "A dream must be given to replace what was lost," she explained. "Yours, or another's?" Lucien hesitated. Then, slowly, he exhaled and let his mind drift. He closed his eyes and imagined. A door, hidden in a field of endless stars. A voice calling his name. A promise he had yet to fulfill. When he opened his eyes, the jar was full, glowing softly in the dim light. The dream collector smiled. "Your journey has only just begun." Lucien never stopped visiting the archive of dreams. He became its guardian, its explorer, its storyteller. He learned to weave dreams and unmake nightmares, to protect what should never be forgotten. And sometimes, just sometimes, he glimpsed the golden-eyed door in his own dreams, waiting for the day he would finally step through. Because every dream, even the lost ones, must eventually find their way home. Evelyn's Enchanted Garden Adventure. The town of Willowmere was known for its endless fields of lavender and the way the mist curled over its rooftops every morning like a whispered secret. But what the townsfolk didn't know was that beyond the rolling meadows, past the ancient oak grove, there was a garden unlike any other, a garden hidden from ordinary eyes, one that only appeared to those with the heart to believe in magic. Evelyn was one such believer. She had always been drawn to the unknown, to the forgotten corners of the world where mystery lingered in the air. It was on one such exploration that she found herself wandering deeper into the forest than ever before, following a golden butterfly that flitted just out of reach. The moment she stepped beyond the last towering oak, she felt a shift in the air, like stepping into a dream. Before her stood a grand wrought iron gate entwined with vines of shimmering silver leaves. It had no latch, yet it swung open the moment she touched it. Beyond the gate lay a sight that stole the breath from her lungs. The garden was alive. Flowers of impossible colors bloomed in spirals, their petals whispering songs in a language she did not know. Trees with sapphire leaves stretched toward a sky that shimmered like liquid gold. A brook ran through the center, its waters glowing with an inner light, reflecting constellations that did not belong to any sky Evelyn had ever known. And then she heard it, a voice, soft as the breeze yet filled with an ageless wisdom. "Welcome, traveler." A woman stood among the flowers, her gown woven from ivy and moonlight. Her eyes held galaxies, and when she smiled, the garden itself seemed to exhale with joy. "I am Lady Asteria, keeper of the enchanted garden," she said. "And you, Evelyn, have been chosen." Evelyn was too mesmerized to question how the woman knew her name. Instead, she let herself be led deeper into the garden, where wonders unfolded before her eyes. Fireflies the size of sparrows weaved glowing trails in the air. A tree with crystal branches bore fruit that shimmered like stardust. She saw a pond where koi fish leapt and transformed into birds midair before diving back down as fish once more. Asteria led her to a grove where the air hummed with energy. In the center stood a towering tree with a single silver blossom at its heart. "This is the heart of the garden," Asteria explained. "It is what keeps this place alive." But Evelyn noticed something strange. Shadows slithered along the garden's edges, curling like smoke, darkening the once vibrant flowers. Asteria's expression grew troubled. "The withering is spreading. Something is trying to consume the magic of this place." Evelyn stepped forward. "How do we stop it?" Asteria hesitated before placing a hand over Evelyn's heart. "The garden has chosen you. But the answer does not lie in battle, it lies in the deepest truth of your heart." That night, Evelyn dreamt. She stood in the garden, but it was not the same. The trees were lifeless, the flowers dull. And in the distance, a voice called her name, not Asteria's, but another's, one she had forgotten. She turned and saw a figure standing at the garden's edge. A boy, no older than herself, his face blurred as if lost in mist. "You left me," he whispered. "You forgot." Evelyn's heart clenched. Who was he? Why did his words fill her with sorrow? She woke with a gasp, the silver petal still glowing in her palm. The next morning, she ran back to the heart of the garden, determination surging through her veins. "I remember," she whispered. The shadows thickened, twisting in fury, but Evelyn did not falter. She stepped forward, pressing the silver petal against the heart of the tree. Light erupted. The garden trembled, and then, a voice. Soft, uncertain. "I thought you would never come back." The mist parted, and the boy from her dream stood before her. But now, his face was clear. She knew him. He had been part of her world once. A friend. A brother. Someone she had loved and lost, whose memory had been swallowed by time. Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to forget." He smiled, and the garden bloomed around them, vibrant once more. The withering retreated, vanishing as if it had never been. Asteria watched with knowing eyes. The garden was never dying, Evelyn. It was waiting. Evelyn turned to the boy, her heart aching with all the things unsaid. "Will you stay?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But I'll always be here, whenever you need me." And then, as softly as the wind, he was gone. As Evelyn left the garden, the silver petal still in her grasp, she knew she had changed. She carried the garden within her now, its magic, its memories, its unspoken promises. Time passed. The seasons shifted. And though Evelyn returned to her life in Willowmere, she often found herself standing at the forest's edge, waiting for the golden butterfly to appear once more. Years later, when Evelyn had grown older, she felt the pull again, the quiet call of something unfinished. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stepped beyond the towering oaks once more, her heart steady, knowing where the path would lead. The gate stood open, waiting. When she stepped through, the garden was as vibrant as ever. And there, among the flowers, stood Asteria, her knowing smile unchanged. But beside her, no longer shrouded in mist, stood the boy from her dreams. "Welcome back, Evelyn," he said, his voice no longer a whisper, but warm and real. She stepped forward, no longer afraid, no longer lost. And this time, she would stay. Yura and the Enchanted Handkerchief. The city of Eldermere was a place where magic barely flickered anymore. Once, centuries ago, it had been the heart of enchantment, where spells flowed as freely as the rivers and whispered through the air like a forgotten melody. Now, the only remnants of magic were tucked away in antique shops, sold as trinkets to those who barely believed in them. Yura had always believed. She had spent her childhood scouring flea markets and forgotten bookstores, searching for remnants of the old world. It was on a dreary autumn afternoon, just as the sky threatened to rain, that she found it, tucked between moth-bitten scarves and forgotten brooches, a handkerchief unlike any she had ever seen. It was embroidered with golden thread, the pattern shifting subtly in the light as if they were alive. The fabric was impossibly soft, carrying the scent of something familiar yet unplaceable. As Yura picked it up, a strange warmth spread through her fingertips. "The last piece of real magic," murmured the old shopkeeper from behind the counter. His eyes twinkled, deep and knowing. "It chooses its owner, you know." Yura wasn't sure if she believed him. But something inside her stirred, deep and ancient, and she knew she couldn't leave without it. That night, she sat at her window, tracing the embroidery with her fingers. The city lights flickered below, a reflection of the stars above. She sighed, pressing the handkerchief to her chest, as if expecting it to whisper secrets to her. And then, it did. A gust of wind surged through her room, despite the windows being shut. The handkerchief slipped from her grasp, unfolding midair, its golden threads unraveling and rewinding, forming words that shimmered like liquid gold. "Where do you wish to go?" Yura gasped. She hesitated. But before she could answer, the fabric wrapped around her wrist, pulling her forward. The world twisted, colors bending and stretching, until she was no longer in Eldermere. Yura landed in the middle of a grand courtyard, the air thick with the scent of rain-kissed roses and something unnameable, something ancient. The sky was a deep indigo, speckled with stars that hung far too low, as if she could reach out and touch them. Before her stood a city unlike any she had ever seen. Towering spires of crystalline stone reflected the starlight, bridges wove through the air, connecting floating islands covered in lush greenery. People dressed in elegant robes strolled past her, their gazes curious but unsurprised. "Welcome back, Yura." She turned sharply. A man stood before her, his face familiar yet unplaceable. He wore deep blue robes threaded with gold, and in his hand, he held a matching handkerchief, identical to hers. "You've been gone a long time," he said, his voice carrying an emotion she couldn't name. Yura's breath hitched. "I don't remember this place." The man smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's what happens when you leave magic behind. Over the next few days, or was it weeks, Yura wandered the city, uncovering memories buried deep within her. The grand halls of the Celestial Archive, where knowledge flowed through floating tomes. The shimmering gardens where fireflies carried whispers of the past. And always, the man, Oren, beside her, watching, waiting. She learned the truth slowly, painfully. She had once belonged to this world. She had wielded magic not as a trick, but as a birthright. The handkerchief had been her tether, the last fragment of a life she had abandoned. "But why did I leave?" she whispered one evening, staring at her reflection in a pond that rippled with visions of her past. "Why did I forget?" Oren hesitated before speaking. "Because magic comes with a price." And then the memories returned all at once. A war. A choice. A desperate escape. Yura had severed her ties to magic to save herself. To forget the pain of what she had lost. The handkerchief had been the only thing that remained, hidden away, waiting for the day she would remember. But now she had a decision to make. Eldamir or the City of Stars? The past or the present? I can't stay, she told Auron the night before she was meant to return. This world, it's beautiful. But I don't belong here anymore. Auron's expression didn't change, but she saw the sadness in his eyes. You do belong here. But I understand. He placed something in her hand. Another handkerchief, identical to hers but woven with deep blue threads. A gift, he said. In case you ever wish to find your way back. The next morning, Yura pressed the handkerchief to her heart, whispering her wish. The golden threads unraveled, spinning her away from the city of magic, back to the familiar hum of Eldamir. She woke in her bed, the morning sun streaming through the curtains. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. But when she looked down, both handkerchiefs lay folded neatly in her lap. Time passed, and Yura lived her life as before, almost. The streets of Eldamir no longer felt quite as dull. She found herself pausing at the antique shop windows, half expecting to see a flash of golden thread. Some nights, she dreamt of the City of Stars, of floating islands and firefly-lit gardens. And always, she wondered. One evening, just as twilight painted the sky in hues of violet and gold, she unfolded the blue threaded handkerchief and traced the embroidery with her fingertips. The thread shimmered. A gust of wind surged through her room. A smile touched Yura's lips as the fabric lifted from her hands, its golden words forming once more. Where do you wish to go? Yura took a deep breath. And this time, she answered. The Guide of the Misty Forest. The town of Evermere lay on the edge of the world, where the land met the sea and the forest stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. Generations had lived in the town, but none had ever dared to enter the Misty Forest, the ancient woodland that began where Evermere ended. Wrapped in eternal mist, the forest was a place of whispers, shadows, and secrets. It was said that those who ventured inside never returned. But one night, under the pale glow of a silver moon, a girl named Eloan stood at the forest's edge, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no choice but to go in. The villagers had warned her since childhood, do not enter the mist. But when her younger brother, Finn, had vanished beyond the tree line 2 nights ago, she knew there was no other way. The forest was not silent. The trees sighed with unseen voices, and the mist curled around her like fingers. With every step, the air grew colder, heavier, as if the forest itself was watching, waiting. She gripped the lantern in her hands, its glow barely piercing through the thick fog. Finn, she called. Her voice was swallowed instantly, devoured by the mist. Then, something moved. A figure emerged from the haze, tall, cloaked, and impossibly still. It was neither man nor beast, its form shifting slightly with the mist. Though it had no discernible face, Eloan could feel its gaze upon her. You seek the lost, the figure said, its voice neither male nor female, but something in between. But the lost do not wish to be found. Eloan's grip tightened around her lantern. My brother is in here. I need to find him. The figure tilted its head. Then you must walk the path of the forgotten. And with that, it turned and began to walk, dissolving into the mist. Without hesitation, Eloan followed. The deeper she went, the stranger the forest became. The trees were no longer trees, but towering shapes that breathed, their bark pulsing with something akin to life. Shadows moved in the mist, whispering in voices that sounded almost familiar. Memories. She saw glimpses of her past, her mother's laughter, her father's steady hands, the night she and Finn had sat on the rooftop, dreaming of adventure. The forest was showing her pieces of herself, weaving them into the mist. Where are you taking me? She asked the figure, who walked a few steps ahead. To the place where all lost things go. At last, they reached a clearing. In its center stood an ancient, crumbling archway, carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. The mist thickened around it, swirling like a living thing. "He is beyond," the figure said. "But the choice to enter is yours." Eloan hesitated. The archway pulsed with something vast, something endless. She had come so far, but now, standing at the threshold, fear gripped her. "What is on the other side?" she whispered. The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a hand, and the mist parted, just enough for Eloan to see. Finn. He stood in the distance, looking at her with wide eyes, as if caught between dreaming and waking. He was alive. But he did not move. She took a step forward, and the mist recoiled, revealing what lay beyond the arch. A city. Not of stone and mortar, but of shadows and light, a place where the lost wandered endlessly. It was neither dark nor light, neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. Eloan turned to the figure. "If I go through, can I bring him back?" The figure tilted its head. "Only if he wishes to leave." She stepped through. The moment she did, the air changed. The mist thickened, wrapping around her like a second skin. The city stretched endlessly, its towers reaching into a sky that had no sun, no stars, only mist and memory. "Finn," she called, running toward him. He turned, blinking as if trying to place her. "Eloan?" His voice was distant, hollow. "What are you doing here?" She grabbed his hands, desperate. "I came to take you home." Finn hesitated. He looked over his shoulder at the city behind him, something unreadable in his expression. "I don't know if I can." Tears burned in Eloan's eyes. "You can. You just have to choose." For a long moment, Finn said nothing. Then, the mist stirred. A sound, like a breath being drawn, rippled through the air. The figure from before appeared at the edge of the city, watching. Finn met her gaze, something clearing in his eyes. "I want to go home." The moment he spoke the words, the mist roared. The city trembled. The towers faded. The ground beneath them cracked, splitting into light and shadow. Eloan held onto Finn, refusing to let go. The mist wrapped around them, pulling, pushing, trying to keep what had been lost. But she would not let it take him again. "Hold on," she whispered. "Just hold on." Then, suddenly, they were falling. Eloan gasped as she hit solid ground. The lantern's glow flickered beside her. The mist was gone. She was back in the forest. And Finn was beside her. He blinked, his hands clutching hers as if afraid she might disappear. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You found me." Relief flooded her, and she pulled him into a tight embrace. "I'll always find you." The trees whispered around them, softer now. The mist receded, curling back into the forest, satisfied. Eloan turned, searching for the figure. But it was gone. Only the faintest shimmer of mist remained, drifting toward the archway before vanishing completely. They walked back together, hand in hand, leaving the misty forest behind. The villagers never questioned how Finn had returned. And Eloan never spoke of what she had seen. But sometimes, on nights when the mist rolled in from the trees, she would catch a glimpse of something watching from the forest's edge. A silent guardian. A guide for the lost. And she would smile, knowing that some things were not meant to be explained, only remembered. The vampire's redemption. The town of Blackthorn had long whispered of a curse that dwelled within its borders, an old story passed from lips to ears, growing darker with each telling. They spoke of the mansion that stood on the outskirts, shrouded in ivy and gloom, its windows forever dark, its doors never opening. And within it, they claimed, lived a monster, one that fed on the blood of the living. But what the people of Blackthorn didn't know was that the monster had a name. Lucian. For centuries, Lucian had watched the world change through the veil of time, his existence stretching endlessly into the unknown. He had once been a man, a soldier, a lover, a brother. But those things had faded with the years, slipping away like sand through his fingers, leaving only hunger behind. He had tried to resist. He had failed. So he chose solitude, locking himself away in the mansion, sealing himself from the world he no longer deserved to walk among. He had long given up on redemption, on the idea that he could ever be anything more than a creature of darkness. Until she arrived. On a night when the moon hung high, casting silver over the mist-laden fields, Lucian heard something unusual, the faint creak of the mansion's gates, long untouched by mortal hands. Curious, he moved to the window, parting the heavy drapes just enough to see. A woman stood beyond the iron gates. Young, dressed in travel-worn clothes, her auburn hair catching the moonlight. She was not trembling in fear, nor did she turn away at the sight of the looming house. Instead, she reached forward and pushed against the gate. To his astonishment, it opened. Lucian's breath caught. The gate had not been opened in over a century. Who was she? Her name was Evelyn. She was a healer, a wanderer, a seeker of lost things. And she had come searching for something only the mansion could give her. Hope. Lucian had expected fear when she stepped into his world. Instead, she met his eyes with quiet understanding. "I know what you are," she said softly. "Then you should run." His voice was rough, worn from disuse. "You should be afraid." "I am not." She was either brave or foolish. Or both. Evelyn did not leave. Night after night, she returned, bringing with her stories of the world outside, of rivers that ran like liquid gold at sunset, of music that made people dance under lantern-lit skies, of the laughter of children and the warmth of the sun. Lucian listened, though he told himself he did not care. But something about her presence gnawed at him, something he had not felt in years. Longing. For the first time in centuries, he wanted. Not blood, not vengeance, something else. Something impossible. Connection. But darkness is not so easily undone. One night, as the storm raged outside, Evelyn arrived with blood on her hands. Not her own, but another's. A dying man she had tried to save, but could not. Lucian smelled the blood before she even spoke. His body tensed, his fangs ached with need. The hunger roared in him, terrible and unrelenting. "I need your help," she pleaded. "There's a sickness in the town. People are dying." Lucian recoiled. "I am no healer. But you could be." Her words struck something deep within him. A memory. A promise made long ago, before the darkness claimed him. He had once been a healer. A protector. He had once been human. That night, he made a choice. Lucian left the mansion for the first time in over a century. The town was wary of him, their fear thick in the air. But Evelyn stood beside him, unshaken. "Trust him," she told them. "Or more will die." The sickness had spread rapidly, its victims slipping away before dawn. He could smell the decay in their blood, the illness twisting within them. It was not natural. It was a curse. And he knew how to break it. Lucian had spent centuries studying the magic that ran through his veins, trying to master what he was. Now, for the first time, he would use it not for destruction, but for salvation. One by one, he healed them, drawing the sickness from their bodies into his own, letting it burn through him before expelling it into the night. It was agony. It was redemption. And when it was done, he collapsed. Evelyn caught him before he could hit the ground. The town of Blackthorn would never forget what happened that night. When dawn came, the sickness was gone. The people had been saved. And the monster of Blackthorn had fallen. Lucian awoke days later, weak but alive, his body no longer craving what it once had. The hunger had been silenced, replaced by something else, peace. He turned his head, and there she was. Evelyn. Watching over him. "You stayed," he whispered. "Of course I did." For the first time in centuries, Lucian smiled. He did not return to the mansion. He stayed in Blackthorn, not as a monster, but as a man. A healer once more. And though the shadows of his past still lingered, Evelyn's light never wavered. Through her, he had found his redemption. Through her, he had found something he had never dared to dream of. Home. But the darkness had not forgotten him. One night, as he walked the now thriving town, he felt something shift in the air. A presence, watching. A figure cloaked in midnight stood at the edge of the village. "You thought you could leave," the voice purred, cold as the grave. Lucian turned, standing taller than he had in centuries. "I did more than leave," he said. "I changed." The figure stepped forward, the shadows twisting around them. "Then let's see if you truly have." The battle was not yet over. But this time, Lucian would not fight alone. The little dog who loved the rain. In a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and vast meadows, there lived a little dog named Pippin. Unlike most dogs, who feared the storm and shivered at the sound of thunder, Pippin loved the rain. He loved the way raindrops danced upon the rooftops, the way the streets shimmered like glass when they were wet, and the way the scent of the earth deepened with every droplet that fell from the sky. But most of all, he loved the feeling of raindrops against his fur, the way they trickled down his ears and cooled his nose. To Pippin, rain was not something to hide from. It was something to embrace. Yet, despite his love for rainy days, Pippin was alone. He had once belonged to someone. A boy with warm hands and a laugh that sounded like music. They had played in the rain together once, jumping in puddles, chasing raindrops, and running through fields where the rain kissed the wildflowers. The boy had named him Pippin because, he had said, he was small and full of energy, just like the tiny apple that grew in their backyard. But one day, the boy had left. Pippin did not understand where he had gone. Only that he had been taken away, and that he never came back. And so, Pippin waited. Through summers where the heat made the streets shimmer. Through winters where the frost painted delicate patterns on the windows. Through springs where flowers bloomed in a riot of colors. But most of all, he waited through autumn, when the rain would return, and he could run through the puddles again, just like they had done before. But no matter how many seasons passed, the boy never returned. The people of the town knew of Pippin. They saw him trotting through the streets on rainy days, his small paws splashing in puddles, his tail wagging as if he had not a care in the world. They watched as he sat by the old bus stop, looking out at the road, as if expecting someone to step off a bus and call his name. "Poor thing," the baker would sigh, watching from her shop window. "He's waiting for someone who's never coming back," the postman would murmur as he rode past on his bicycle. But Pippin did not listen to their whispers. He only listened to the rain. One autumn evening, as the rain poured harder than it had in weeks, a girl named Lily found herself caught in the downpour. She was new to town, having just moved into the small house at the end of the street with her grandmother. She had always loved the rain too, but tonight, she had forgotten her umbrella, and now she stood beneath the awning of the bakery, watching the storm with a sigh. Then, she saw him. A little dog, dancing in the rain. He was small and scruffy, his fur damp and clinging to his body. But his eyes sparkled with joy. He leapt into puddles with an enthusiasm that made her laugh, shaking off the water as though it were the greatest thing in the world. Without thinking, Lily stepped into the rain. Pippin noticed her immediately. He tilted his head, ears perked up, watching as she slowly approached. She knelt in front of him, smiling. "Do you like the rain too?" she asked. Pippin wagged his tail. That was how it began. Lily saw Pippin every day after that. On sunny days, he would sit by the bus stop, still waiting, still hoping. But on rainy days, those were different. On rainy days, he ran through the streets, and Lily ran with him. She learned his story through the whispers of the townspeople. About the boy who had left. About the little dog who never stopped waiting. And slowly, she realized something. Maybe Pippin wasn't just waiting for someone who would never return. Maybe he was waiting for someone new. The first time Lily brought Pippin home, he hesitated at the doorstep. His small paws faltered, as if unsure whether he was allowed to step inside. But then Lily knelt beside him and whispered, "Come on, Pippin. Let's go inside." And just like that, he did. Her grandmother was hesitant at first, but she could not resist the warmth in Pippin's eyes or the way he curled up by the fireplace on rainy evenings. He was polite, well-behaved, and most of all, he made Lily smile. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The rainy season came and went, and Pippin no longer waited at the bus stop. He no longer sat by the road, looking for someone who would never come home. Because he had already found home. One evening, as the first raindrops began to fall from the sky, Lily and Pippin stood outside together, watching as the streets darkened with water. "Do you want to go for a run?" she asked, grinning. Pippin barked happily, tail wagging. And so, they ran. Through the puddles, through the rain, through the town that had once only whispered of a lonely dog who loved the storm. But he was no longer lonely. Because now, he was loved. And as the rain continued to fall, washing away the past, Pippin knew that some things, like love, like family, like the simple joy of dancing in the rain, were meant to last forever. Years later, when Lily was older, she still thought of Pippin. On rainy days, she would sit by the window, watching as the streets filled with water. And sometimes, just sometimes, she swore she could hear the patter of little paws outside, splashing in the puddles, just as they had always done. The townspeople still spoke of the little dog who had loved the rain, of the girl who had given him a home, and of the magic that comes when love finds those who wait. And on the rainiest nights, if you listened closely, you could hear the laughter of a girl and the joyful bark of a dog echoing through the streets. Dancing in the rain. Together. Forever. The Guardian Angel. There is a legend that every soul is born with a guardian, an unseen presence that watches, protects, and sometimes, when the world grows too cruel, intervenes. Most people never see their guardian, never hear their voice or feel their touch. But some, in moments of deepest sorrow or greatest need, catch a glimpse of something impossible. This is the story of Ilara and her angel. Ilara had always felt different. Since childhood, she had known things she shouldn't. She could sense danger before it came, feel warmth in the coldest of nights, and hear whispers in the wind that no one else seemed to notice. Her grandmother called her special. The village children called her strange. But Ilara didn't mind being different, until the accident. She was 12 when it happened. One moment, she was playing on the riverbank, laughing as she chased dragonflies. The next, the ground beneath her crumbled, and she was falling, down into the rushing waters, the icy current pulling her under. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. Then, just as the darkness closed in, she felt it. A warmth unlike anything she had ever known. Gentle hands lifting her, carrying her. A voice whispering softly, "You are not meant to leave yet." And then, she was on the shore, coughing, gasping, alive. When she opened her eyes, she saw him. A boy? No, something more than a boy. He stood in the sunlight, his golden hair glowing, his eyes the color of the sky just before dawn. He was beautiful in a way that no human could be. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. He smiled. "Your guardian." Then, just like that, he was gone. Ilara never spoke of what she saw. Who would believe her? The villagers would call her mad. So she kept the memory tucked away, a secret she carried in her heart. But she knew, from that day on, that she was not alone. Years passed, and life in the village continued. Ilara grew into a young woman, strong-willed and kind-hearted, but always with the feeling that she was waiting for something. Or someone. And then, the war came. The kingdom had been peaceful for as long as anyone could remember, but peace is fragile. The day the soldiers arrived, the village burned. Ilara ran, her heart pounding, smoke choking the air. She reached the old chapel at the edge of town, thinking she could hide. But when she turned, she saw them, 3 soldiers, their eyes cold, their swords drawn. There was nowhere to run. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not expecting an answer. But the answer came. A gust of wind, sudden and strong, roared through the chapel. The torches flickered, the air trembled, and then, standing between her and the soldiers, was him. The angel. Only this time, he was not just a fleeting vision. He was real. He raised his hand, and the soldiers staggered back, their swords ripped from their hands by an unseen force. Their faces paled with terror, and without a word, they fled into the night. Elara stared, her heart racing. You're real. He turned to her, his blue eyes filled with something unreadable. I have always been real. His name was Kale. He was not supposed to reveal himself. Guardians were meant to remain unseen, to watch from afar. But Elara, she had always been different. She had always been able to sense him. And when he had seen the soldiers draw their swords, he had known he could not stay in the shadows any longer. For the first time, Elara and her guardian walked side by side. He told her things no human had ever known, about the threads of fate that wove the world together, about the realms beyond their own, about the war that raged not just among men, but among unseen forces far greater than they could imagine. And most of all, he told her the truth. That she was special. That she had been chosen for something greater than she knew. That she had been born not just to be protected, but to change the world. But even angels have enemies. Word spread of a girl guarded by a celestial being, and it did not take long before dark forces took notice. One night, as they rested in the ruins of an old monastery, shadows rose from the ground, their forms shifting, twisting. The air grew cold, and a voice, ancient and cruel, echoed through the stone walls. She does not belong to you, Kale. The shadows attacked. Kale fought, his wings unfurling in a blaze of light, his sword gleaming as he struck down the darkness. But there were too many. And Elara, she could do nothing but watch, helpless, as the one who had saved her, who had watched over her all her life, was struck down. No, she screamed, running to him as he fell to his knees, his light dimming. The shadows loomed over them, victory within reach. And then, a light. Not from Kale. From her. It exploded outward, golden and fierce, sending the shadows reeling. Elara felt something awaken within her, something powerful, something she had always carried but never understood. She was not just meant to be saved. She was meant to save. When the battle ended, Kale lay weak but alive. And Elara, she stood not as a helpless girl, but as something more. Kale looked up at her, pride and wonder in his eyes. You were never just a mortal, he murmured. You were always meant to be something more. Elara reached out, cupping his face in her hands. Then I won't run anymore. She helped him stand. And together, they walked forward, toward the unknown, toward destiny, toward whatever lay ahead. Because some souls are not meant to be merely watched over. Some souls are meant to fly. The Potion of the Miniature World. The day Elias discovered the old alchemist's shop was the day his life changed forever. Nestled between two towering buildings at the end of an alley no one seemed to notice, the shop had no sign, no windows, just an ancient wooden door carved with symbols Elias didn't recognize. He had walked this street 100 times before, but today, something compelled him to push the door open. The moment he stepped inside, the air shifted. The scent of herbs, ink, and something almost electric filled his lungs. Shelves lined with dusty bottles stretched into the shadows, their labels written in languages long forgotten. At the center of the shop sat an old man, his beard so white it seemed to glow in the dim light. You're late, the man said, as if he had been expecting him. Elias blinked. I don't think I was supposed to be here. The old man chuckled. Fate has a way of bringing the right people at the right time. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small vial. Inside, a shimmering blue liquid swirled like captured stardust. A shrinking potion, the old man said. A single drop will take you where no human has ever gone. Elias should have questioned it. Should have laughed. Should have walked away. But something in the old man's eyes, something knowing, made him reach for the vial. And that was how it all began. Back in his attic room, Elias sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, the vial resting in his palm. He hesitated only for a moment before uncorking it. The scent of rain and wildflowers filled the air. "One drop," he murmured, tipping the vial. The droplet hit his tongue, and instantly, the world exploded in color. A rush of wind. A feeling of being pulled downward, no, not downward, inward. The room around him stretched, then collapsed, then expanded again. And when the dizziness passed, everything was enormous. The wooden floor beneath him had transformed into an endless plain of grainy ridges. His bookshelves towered like skyscrapers, his lamp a distant sun. The small crack in his window, which he had never noticed before, yawned open like a canyon. He was no bigger than a speck of dust. And he was not alone. The first creature he encountered was an ant, only now, the ant was the size of a horse, its mandibles clicking as it studied him. Elias stumbled backward, heart pounding. He had read stories of shrunken adventurers, but none had prepared him for the sheer immensity of this new world. Before he could react, something flashed overhead, a streak of iridescent blue. A dragonfly, its wings humming like a storm, swooped low, nearly knocking him over. The wind from its flight sent Elias tumbling onto his back. He had to move. Had to find shelter. And then he saw it, a mushroom, standing tall like a tree, its cap wide enough to provide cover. He ran, dodging a colony of marching ants, and reached the mushroom's base just as a beetle the size of a carriage scuttled past. His breath came in ragged gasps. This was no longer his attic. This was an entirely different world. As Elias adjusted to his new size, he began to explore. The dust mites in his rug were now strange, glowing creatures that pulsed like jellyfish. A single drop of water from a leaking pipe had become a lake, its surface shimmering with colors he had never seen before. Then, he met them. At first, he thought they were fireflies, their tiny lights flickering in the distance. But as they drew closer, he realized they were not insects at all. They were people. No taller than his thumb, their translucent wings glittering like fragments of the moon, they hovered before him with cautious curiosity. One of them, a girl with hair like spun silver, landed on a blade of grass and tilted her head. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. Elias swallowed hard. I think I drank something I wasn't supposed to." The tiny people exchanged glances. "Come with us," the girl said. "Before the weavers find you." "The weavers?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she turned and flew, and Elias had no choice but to follow. The village of the small folk was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Hidden beneath the roots of a tree, it glowed with bioluminescent flowers, and its tiny homes were carved into acorns and nutshells. The small folk moved gracefully, their wings trailing light as they weaved threads of shimmering silk from plant fibers, crafting delicate clothes and homes from the world around them. But there was tension in the air. "The weavers are coming," the silver-haired girl, Lyra, explained. "They do not welcome outsiders." Elias barely had time to understand what she meant before the wind changed. A sound, like the rustling of 1,000 pages, filled the air. Then, dark figures emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing like embers. The weavers. They were not small folk. They were taller, cloaked in strands of black silk, their limbs long and spindly. They moved like whispering wind, weaving the darkness around them, their voices like a chorus of shifting leaves. "He does not belong," one of them hissed. "He will unravel the threads," another murmured. Elias felt the ground tremble beneath him. The weavers lifted their hands, and suddenly, the air was thick with strings, silken strands forming a web around him, tightening, pulling. "Run!" Lyra shouted. Elias tore free, sprinting through the village as the weavers gave chase. He stumbled through a field of glowing mushrooms, past rivers of dew, his heart pounding. Then, up ahead, a glowing portal. A tear in the fabric of this miniature world. "The potion!" Lyra called. It left a door open. Elias didn't hesitate. He lunged forward just as the weaver's threads closed around him. And everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, he was back. The attic, the wooden floor, the bookshelves, it was all as it had been. Except, in his palm, a single strand of shimmering silk remained. Proof that it had not been a dream. He stared at the tiny thread, then at the now empty vial of potion. And he smiled. Because some doors, once opened, never truly close.